So firstly, Marty Baron, very warm welcome to the Indian Express. Thank you for making the time. I'm going to introduce you with a whole bunch of superlatives, but I mean each and every one of them. You're often referred to as the best editor in the world. I have to be loyal to mine and say, it, you're very close to Raj Kamal Jha, who also, by the way, was an editorial intern at the Post, I think some 30, 40 years ago. But and you're making time to speak with us on your last working day, on the last working day of your tenure as the editor of the Washington Post. And sure. I feel it must be one of the most impactful, the most meaningful sort of editorships in the modern world, and and in modern history, in the modern world. Have I gone overboard with the superlatives, or would you agree?
Well, look, I mean, it's not for me just to
come on, don't be so modest.
I mean, it's been an amazing time. I've been involved in some epic stories. They've been huge. Certainly, most recently with the Trump administration, but prior to that, the National Security Agency and the documents that were leaked by Edward Snowden. Yes. Prior to that, in Boston, of course, the Catholic Church, investigation of the Catholic Church. Prior to that, the 2000 presidential election in Florida, all of that. The disputed election there. It's just been one big story after the next, not to mention America's wars overseas and all of that. So it's been 9/11, of course, the attacks of 9/11. It's been a very eventful career, that's for sure.
Yes, and I want to focus on just the last bit right now. Your tenure at the Post. I mean, if I can just share a small angle, I had the chance of meeting Tim Cook in 2016 when he visited India. They luckily made time. And I asked him, I said, what advice would you give a 29-year-old third-generation publisher of a newspaper company? And he said, look at the business the way the Washington Post has reinvented itself. And so I think from a business perspective, the business success of the WashPo, I believe you've been consistently doing profits for the last 5 years now. You've got 3 million subscribers. I have to ask you, to what degree do you think a lot of this credit of this business success goes to
Trump? Well, I would say, a fair amount, not entirely, but a fair amount. It was clear that people were concerned about what he might do in government. It was clear that a large segment of the American public wanted to make sure that we were vigilant, that we held him to account, that we got at the facts. They were very worried about the stability of American institutions and the capacity of American institutions to hold Donald Trump to account. They felt that Congress was not going to do it. They were worried about the courts, given that he was making so many appointments. And so they were looking to the press to do that job, because there was no other institution in the United States that could do it. And so I think that people were willing to support us, wanted to support us, because they knew that that's what we were going to do.
And Marty, do you find that being anti-establishment, having this adversarial relationship with government, is that like one of the key definitions, you think, of being independent sort of press?
I don't particularly like the word adversarial, but I mean, it becomes at times adversarial. We don't strive necessarily to be adversarial. We strive to gather the facts, put them in proper context, and tell people what's actually going on. And in doing that, sometimes and frequently, actually, we find ourselves in conflict with government, which likes to keep such information secret. And it's not only government, by the way, it's other powerful institutions that wish to do so. And our view is that the public in a democracy has a need and right to know certain kinds of information. And that's necessary for democracy, to have an informed public. And so our job is to try to provide that information that people need and deserve to know. And that brings us into conflict with government. It's not that we set out to have conflict with government. It's just that we find ourselves in conflict with government because we are doing our jobs.
And, one of the one of the criticisms of this business success, not just of the Washpo, but of several titles around the world, is that that press, which actually has all of this, um, earlier the distinction of kind of finding all sorts of truths, not your truth, not my truth, but various different sets of truths. Now in this business model where we're kind of driven by reader revenue, by digital subscriptions, that we are kind of getting sort of forced as an industry to kind of pick sides, pick sides more on ideology than on issue. Um, your newsroom, the NYT newsroom, for instance, several newsrooms actually, the reporters are actually assessed based on how many subscribers they've actually converted. Um, do you feel then that we are therefore it's tougher for us to do that objective, fair, balance, all sides of the story, that traditional old-fashioned definition uh, in this context?
Different news organizations have different models, and so look, whatever we do, we get criticized for it. I mean, the reality is when most of our revenue was coming from advertising, digital advertising, people said all we were trying to do was drive page views and get clicks. Now that we have a model that's built on subscriptions, people say all we're trying to do is appeal to people with a particular ideology. Essentially, what people seem to be saying is that we shouldn't have any economic model whatsoever. Right. I mean, there are really only two sources of revenue for us, right? So there's advertising and there's subscriptions. So if they're saying they don't want us to do things that generate a huge amount of advertising revenue, page views and things like that, and they're saying they don't want us to have digital subscription revenue, they're saying they don't want us to have any revenue. If we don't have any revenue, we can't do our jobs. Look, every news organization has a different mission. And the readers can pick what they want. Certainly they can pick ideological sites. They can also pick sites that they feel are doing their jobs as independent of any party, independent of any ideology. That's how we see ourselves. Still today, in our physical newspaper, on our editorial page, we say under the Washington Post, an independent newspaper. And that's how we think of ourselves. We believe in accountability for government and people of power, regardless of their ideology, regardless of their party. So there's an assumption that somehow for example, that we had a cozy, warm relationship with the Obama administration. We did not. There was a lot of conflict with the Obama administration, and inevitably there will be conflict with the Biden administration as well. So, the readers can pick what they want, and we've decided that our job is to be independent.
Right. I'll just take a follow-up from there is something outside your newsroom, so you can comment as an independent observer. When the New York Times editor fired the opinion editor James Bennett for carrying an opinion piece on a sitting senator Tom Cotton, that I think is what kind of is provoking me to ask you that question. Do you feel that we are now, because the kind of backlash that I guess the New York Times got, I believe they got from readers as well as from inside the newsroom for carrying an opinion which was just so clearly disagreeing with them, was that?
Well, I'm not going to comment specifically on their decision because I don't know enough about it. I know what I read, but I don't have any inside knowledge of it. I will say that on our op-ed page, we try, which I'm not in charge of because we have a strict separation between the news department and the opinion department. We try to have as wide a range of opinions as possible, and we do. And people get upset. Readers get upset. People inside the newsroom get upset over what they're reading on those pages, and we accept that. That we should have a wide range of opinions, that is the nature of a democracy, that there is vigorous, often heated debate, still civil, but heated. And that's the way it is, and that we should provide a forum for that kind of debate. And that is our view of and that's our policy toward our op-ed page.
And Marty, every time you speak, I think it's such a great playbook for all newsrooms around the world, and especially students of journalism. And so, it's just such an incredible job that you've done. I want to ask you about specifically your relationship and, just as being editor, at the time of Trump. Firstly, were you surprised? I think the Washington Post was involved in no small part to uncovering over I believe 30,000 sort of statements of misinformation, false statements, or inaccurate statements that came from Trump. You had a dedicated fact-checking team that was kind of doing that. Um, were you kind of surprised by the fact that in spite of all that's happened in Trump's tenure, it wasn't like he was completely out of the race. It was a fairly close, he had a fair amount of popular support in spite of all of that, in spite of everything that democratic institutions did to question him. Were you were you surprised by that? And does that concern you?
I wasn't surprised by it. It was clear that he always had a large base of support in the United States. It was also clear that they weren't getting their information from the Washington Post and other, from the New York Times or from CNN or the major or most of the major networks. They were getting their information from Fox News, Breitbart, Newsmax, One American News Network. And many of those, all of those actually, had become essentially arms of the administration, political arms of the administration. They were there to support the administration, and so the information ecosystem in which people were living was very different from other people. And we have a very polarized society. That's true in many other societies as well. Yeah. And so it was not at all surprising to me that Donald Trump would draw a tremendous amount of support. I always felt it would be a close election. I felt in 2016 it was going to be a very close election. There's an assumption that everybody here thought that everybody in the United States press, the American press, thought that it was guaranteed that Hillary Clinton was going to win in 2016. I did not. And I have many people who remember my telling them that I thought that Donald Trump had a 40 to 50% chance of winning. And they were shocked when I said that. And so he has a strong base of support. That's the nature of his so-called populist appeal. And I recognize that. And he has a strong capacity, an amazing capacity to draw out voters, the people who have never voted before. And I recognize that as well.
And this ability that he had, and I think a lot of it's happening all over the world almost now, to kind of just delegitimize anything that isn't populist, or rather anything that doesn't have this massive popular kind of any thought, any idea, any opinion that doesn't have this. That isn't blessed with a massively sort of popular, mandate. How do you see this, I guess, phenomena that he kind of started? How do you see this kind of playing out?
Well, look, I mean, I think that it's been deeply concerning. It was clear during his campaign for the presidency, his first campaign for the presidency, that he would seek to marginalize and delegitimize the press. That he would try to instill in his supporters the view that he is the sole source of truth, that everybody else is lying, that everything else is a hoax, that the only person you can believe is himself. And he's had some success at that, I have to say. I mean, he's kept saying it, and he's tried to portray us as what they call the opposition party. He then used the term that we were enemy of the people. He has used the term traitor to describe us. And he has worked very hard to turn the public against the mainstream press so that they don't believe anything that we say, so that they don't even bother to read us. And he's obviously had some considerable success in that regard. And we see that in other countries as well. And people are trying to he's a model for leaders in other countries. And in some ways, he took his cue from autocratic leaders in other countries as well.
Right. No, so now that Trump has lost the election, is that trend, do you think, going to stop? Or do you think that it doesn't matter whether Trump is president or not? He has given a model and a format of, engaging with press for leaders, for corporate leaders, political leaders around the world. That's here to stay.
I think that'll stay. I think that'll be with us for quite some time. But I think we also have to think about, that will always be true of people at the extremes. And I think that will be true of people at the extremes, both on the right and on the left, that they will have their own sources of information. But there's a broad middle. I think there's still a middle. There are independent voters here in the United States. who are more open and are not who do not necessarily feel that everything that Donald Trump utters is true, and they are receptive to other sources of information and evidence. And so if we can provide, if it turns out that we have evidence and it's conclusive, people will acknowledge it. It's always at the margins, you know. You're not going to convince everybody. You're not going to get 100%. The question is, can you get another 10%? Can you get another 15%? Can you get another 20%? And that to me is what's important. Look, there are about 35% of the people in this country who believe in the most bizarre conspiracy theories. You know, they don't necessarily believe that, you know, they think that the attacks on 9/11 were an inside job, that it was executed by Israel or the Jews or whatever, you know, crazy conspiracy theories. And there's always going to be about 35% of the American public that simply doesn't believe anything they read from a mainstream press outlet. They just believe some conspiracy theory that they encountered on the internet, and it affirms their pre-existing point of view.
And do you think that now, you know, platforms, whether it's Google, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Twitter, do you think that they're also now kind of stuck and kind of being either called out for not taking a side, or being imagined to have taken a side, or actually are taking a side in this polarized world?
I don't think they're taking a side. I think they're really struggling with trying to figure out their role. It's not something that they, I believe, gave a lot of thought to before they built their businesses. And so now they're having to grapple with these issues after they already built these businesses. And their entire business model is built on a certain premise of how things work. And they're discovering that there are factors that have a bearing on their business that they never anticipated, and certainly never internally struggled with. Now they're having to struggle with it, and we're seeing that struggle play out almost in a public way. And I think that's a problem for them, because I think certainly at news organizations like ours, you know, we kind of know what we stand for. We've had a lot of experience with public criticism.
Yes.
We sort of we just have experience with this in a way that many of these tech platforms don't. And so I think we're seeing them struggle with this, because these are not issues that they thought about all that much in the past. And I don't know where they'll come out, and I don't know what the exact answers are for them. But ultimately, they'll just have to take a stand and stick with it.
No, so I mean, I want to spend some time on the relationship between Silicon Valley tech platforms and publishers around the world. There's so much that's happened, especially after the Australian legislation now. Do you believe, and I think I've heard you say this before, but you know that the platforms have a certain responsibility towards sort of just you know, controlling inaccurate fake news that kind of just spreads on these platforms?
Yes, I do believe they have a responsibility. All of us, anybody who has power has responsibility. You can't have power without responsibility. And I believe the tech platforms have you know, up till recently, have been willing to and eager to take the revenue and not assume any responsibility. And they felt the responsibility lies elsewhere. Well, what we're discovering is that they bear responsibility like everybody else who holds power. So they have to figure out how to exercise that responsibility, and that's what they're struggling with right now. But they clearly bear responsibility, and they will simply have to decide how to implement that responsibility.
And what about the responsibility they have towards publishers? I mean, firstly, do they have responsibility towards publishers, you think?
I think they do. I mean, I think there's an issue of fairness. I think there's an issue of that they are making money off of our content, and it was a new model, not one that the laws actually prepared us for. And I think if they're making money off of our content, and then they owe us a share of that revenue. And I think what we're seeing play out now is the struggle over how much they owe for the revenue that they generate. Now, I mean, it's also clear that they generate revenue for us simply by making our our content available to people all over the world
Yes.
in a way that it was not available before.
Yes.
If we didn't have the internet, if we didn't have Google, if we didn't have Facebook, far fewer people would see our work.
Yes.
Far fewer people would subscribe, and we would be a physical paper.
Yes.
For us, we would be a physical paper in the Washington area. That's it.
Yes.
So I think we also have to recognize that they've provided something of value to us, but we've also provided something of value to them. And so the question is, what should the revenue share be?
And how did you read into what happened in Australia? I mean, it was quite unprecedented to have the Prime Minister of Australia calling, Modi and other sort of world leaders, bringing attention to the fact that, Facebook and the Australian government is at a standoff.
Right. Well, look, it was a struggle for power there. Facebook was exercising its power and tried to exercise that by not carrying news organizations, and it for a brief moment there was not even carrying government sites. And it's only understandable that the Australian government will try to fight back. This is how policy gets made. And ultimately, they've reached an accommodation. I expected that they would reach an accommodation. And I think that's what we're going to see in other countries, is we're going to see this struggle over power and over revenue. And ultimately, there will be some sort of agreement that people can live with.
But all these platforms, if you meet the management, or if you just look at the history, forget meeting the management, if you just look at the history of these platforms, you see that they all seem so sort of afraid of being disrupted, by the next big platform that comes its way. My question is, do you think that they're actually nervous about this fight getting to a place where, news just kind of backs off? Can platforms like Google and Facebook, can they actually survive if all, big mainstream media, whether it's the Post, whether it's the Express or anybody else, just actually pulls out, because their argument all this time has been, it doesn't make a difference to us. But arguably it does.
My guess is that they can survive without news. There are plenty of other things out there, and there are plenty of other mainstream. There are plenty of non-mainstream news outlets that are perfectly happy to just have Google traffic, perfectly happy to just have Facebook traffic, and they don't care about some sort of revenue share. They'll take the advertising, and they're structured that way with very limited, almost non-existent reporting resources. But there's also a lot of other activity that takes place on Google and takes place on Facebook. And I think they can survive without us. Do they want to survive without us? No, I don't think they do. And they do want to have reliable sources of information. I think that is important to them. Yeah. But I think, there's also the alternative question, and that is, can news organizations survive without the distribution mechanism of Google and Facebook and other social media sites? A lot of us depend on that. We count on that kind of distribution. And so, I think there's got to be some sort of equitable sharing of revenue, and we're seeing the struggle play out right now.
The governments that are kind of getting involved now, I see it was Germany that I think most recently got involved, and Australia, of course, but we're seeing many governments getting involved in actually regulating social media more than they did before. We had some legislation that came out just yesterday in India. Do you think that when governments are getting involved with social media, do you see a lot of, and it's happening in America as well, by the way, do you see that governments are capable of doing this? We saw just how, poor the understanding of the digital world was, in all the hearings that happened in the US. Do you think that there's any good that come out of this, governments getting involved in regulating social media?
Not a lot of good, to be honest. I don't think that, as you pointed out, I don't think that most people in government really understand it. Certainly most politicians have any real understanding of the digital world and how things really work. They barely understand the device that they have in their pocket, and they clearly don't. So many of them. But beyond that, I think that we have to be really careful about government getting involved in deciding what's true and what's false. Yes. Would I have wanted the Trump administration telling the tech companies what's true and what's false and what should be carried and what shouldn't be carried? No, I would not. Would I want the Biden administration doing that? I wouldn't want the Biden administration doing it either. I don't want government doing that. and then some people say, well, do we want the tech companies doing that? And that's I think that that's a serious question, but there's a greater capacity for alternative sites. So there's competition for Facebook, there's competition for Google. Different tech companies can have different policies if they wish. I mean, it's not an easy question. But I do not want government sticking their nose in all of this, telling us what's true and what's false.
What we saw at Capitol Hill, for instance, was we were talking on the one hand of government regulating social media, but in Capitol Hill we saw social media regulating government, right? We saw the kind of very, very strong positions that Twitter took on Trump. A sitting precedent, surely, sure, an outgoing one, but he was still a sitting precedent. Do you think that was smart, what they did?
Smart? I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand.
Was it smart? Do you think it was the right thing to do for social media to kind of censor Trump like that? A sitting precedent like that?
I think it was a reasonable policy decision. He was spreading so much disinformation and misinformation and lies. And I think it was having a toxic impact on our election system. And I think we saw some of the consequences of that in the attack on the Capitol on January 6th. And so I think it was a reasonable policy decision on the part of the tech companies to banish him from their platforms for that period of time.
And I think, at least in the Indian perspective, I can tell you that there are a lot of people in Indian government that kind of just realized the amount of power that social media had, that suddenly, was able to, a few people in Silicon Valley were able to kind of just really make it difficult for Trump to communicate to his voters.
He had plenty of capacity to communicate. I think that's a misimpression. I mean, he can communicate. He can go on Fox News anytime he wants. He goes on Fox News anytime he wants. He can go on One America News Network. He can go on Newsmax. Many of those are just simply propaganda arms for the administration, and he communicates directly with his followers in that manner. They've made their policy decision about what they're going to do, which is to basically act as stenographers and an echo chamber for the Trump administration and for Trump himself. And that's their policy decision. Why can't other institutions make their own policy decision? And why can't tech companies make a policy decision that's different from what Fox News is doing, different from what Breitbart is doing, different from Newsmax? They're entitled to do that.
Sure. And do you see the Biden administration taking a stronger view on social media, doing more regulation to the tech platforms than was earlier done? Or
it looks that way. I mean, obviously, there's no fondness for the tech platforms among the Democrats, among people on the left. They criticize the tech platforms from the other end of the ideological spectrum. They feel that they've been too accommodating of Trump. Trump criticizes them for being and Republicans say they're anti-conservative, yes. and the left says no, you've been way too accommodating. And so the tech companies are a bit in the middle here, and they get criticism from all sides. And there's no fondness among the Democrats, and I think people in the Biden administration for the tech platforms, that's for sure, and among leading Democrats in Congress.
Right. So, if you see the way American government has sort of been representing American businesses outside of America, I've seen it in India. It's they do everything they can to put diplomatic pressure or whatever to kind of encourage and have it's easy for American companies or American multinationals to do business in foreign lands. Will that be the same for a Google, for a Facebook, for a Tesla, as it would have been or as it has been for GE or for Boeing or for any of the large MNCs that you can think of?
You mean will the Biden administration advocate for those tech platforms in the way that it does for, let's say, major manufacturers in the United States?
Yes.
It's hard for me to say. I don't know. My guess is, for the most part, no, they won't. They're actually looking to other countries. They're looking to Europe for how they might regulate tech companies. So they're less likely to be leaning on these other countries to go lightly on the tech platforms. There may be instances, I think, specific instances, let's say with regard to taxation and what have you, where the administration feels that it's unfair. But I don't, honestly, I don't know.
I'll ask one last question on government and technology, then we move on. I asked the finance secretary of India, one of the people who were responsible for framing the annual budget, about his view on cryptocurrencies. And he was quite clear. He said, look, there's no sovereign backing. He can't envision an environment where it would seem constitutionally okay to kind of have trade in Bitcoins or in any cryptocurrency. Does the American government and the American establishment today, American regulators, feel as sort of threatened or as concerned with control on the economy, with the legitimacy of cryptocurrencies as other countries do?
You are getting outside my area of expertise, Anand. I don't feel that I have any particular expertise in this area, and I'm just not capable of answering that. I don't want to fake my way through it.
Okay, no, fair. I won't push you on that. Let's come back a bit to. I want to question you a bit about India. I don't think you ever visited India, right? Am I right in saying?
I'm not. Now I have time.
And you have rejected all my invitations.
You can invite me again. I didn't. Yeah, I couldn't accept your previous
you have a standing invitation from me at all times, and I genuinely mean it. But I wanted to ask a couple of things. One is that why do you think that the American press, and this is my view, I'm just sharing my view about how the American press covers India. I think it's been pretty much the same. It's always whether it's a rape, whether it's poverty, it's the same thematically. It's the same things that you kind of see, that give a lot of, they get a lot of space and attention when covering India. Why do you think that is, if you agree, by the way?
I don't know if I agree. I haven't really studied it, but I mean, I think that obviously there's a lot of interest in the politics in India. There's an interest in that. Look, I mean, I think a lot of the issues that we're interested in are reflective of the kinds of issues that we deal with here in the United States, sort of ethnic tensions, religious tensions, political populism. And so I think anybody who is reporting on another country is coming to some degree with the perspective of what is their own population interested in? What are the kinds of subjects are they interested in? But we've covered a lot of other issues within India as well. I mean, certainly the business landscape in India has been the subject of intense interest for a long period of time. Right. I think maybe the discomfort comes from the shift in coverage from one subject to the next. Nobody was particularly complaining when people were when the news media was writing about the extraordinary economic success in India. Everybody thought that was fantastic, and the coverage was just fine. But when you start to cover underlying tensions and fractures within a society, people are far more uncomfortable with that.
Right. No, I mean,
and I have to say that I believe those are real stories. I mean, I think that those are significant stories.
And the number of times the Washington Post has quoted and cited and linked to Express original reporting, it's heartening to see that there's the interest has been taken to know a good, credible source rather than just kind of whatever you can find on the net, and then we see that. Right. But it kind of gets me to an interesting problem that we kind of, or an interesting sort of phenomena that we kind of seeing now, is for an American to comment on India and affairs in India or a country like India. It would typically be maybe 15, 20 years ago, it would be somebody who kind of knew a lot about it. Somebody who kind of, you had maybe, you had people sort of, somebody who was dedicated to covering the subcontinent, or a foreign affairs expert. And it was somebody who typically was associated with a brand like the Washington Post or the New York Times, or somebody who has that kind of clout. Now, you see that, Rihanna puts out one tweet, which says, why we should be talking about this. And she links to an article, a CNN article, which kind of talks about the Indian farmer protest. And you see the kind of massive response that has. And that's on the one end of the spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got, people like Trevor Noah or what's his name, Hassan Minaj, right? Who kind
Right.
of claim to be explaining an issue in India to you. They say, here's all you need to know about the Indian farmer protest, or here's all you need to know about US elections. Um, you know, sort of pop icons are kind of opining, they're kind of weighing in on issues that typically they probably wouldn't get attention for. These are people who probably have more followers on Twitter and on Instagram than the Washington Post does. Again, how does that play out? How do you see that kind of a conversation having a logical ending?
Well, I guess I'm famous for being very nervous about social media activity. And I've gotten stirred up a lot of controversy because I believe that we should abide by certain standards. And I think we should abide by certain standards. And what I would like look, when we publish things in our paper or online, we actually have editors involved. We have a lot of discussions. We take a lot of care with what we do. There are layers of review, all of that. We take a close look at how the stories are written, whether they have proper context, all of that. It's really difficult to do on social media. So I think it's important that journalists who are participating in social media, who are posting there, exercise care and restraint in the same way that they would if they were publishing in our publication, online or in print. And that they need to edit themselves. And I worry that there are a lot of people who are participating in social media who are they're not editing themselves at all. And they don't recognize that the way that they say things and the things that they say on social media reflect unfavorably on our institution and seem to be representative of what our institution wants to do. The public looks at them as a representative of the institution, yeah. and they are acting on their own. And I think people have to be really careful about that.
And what about the sort of pop culture icons? When they begin to opine on issues that typically they wouldn't have, or typically their opinions wouldn't be kind of consumed the way that they've gotten now. Again, whether it's a Rihanna, whether it's a Hassan Minaj, Trevor Noah. I don't see this trend stopping. I don't know whether you do.
It's not going to stop. I mean, look, social media is with us. We live with it. I've seen things said about me on social media that are very upsetting and not true. I don't actually go on there to contest them because all it does is stir everybody up. I'd rather just see it fade away. Look, I mean, I think the public has to decide whether this is a credible source or not a credible source. Is this a person who knows what he or she is talking about or not? And all of those people, celebrities or non-celebrities, they all have the right to express their views, I suppose. They certainly do. We have free expression. I believe in that. Yes. That said, people can take them for what they're worth. They either know what they're talking about or they don't know what they're talking about. And people will have different opinions about whether they know what they're talking about or whether they're highlighting an issue that needs to be highlighted. I mean, look, we have free expression. Ultimately, the public has to be a sort of critical consumer of information, of commentary, and all of that. And they have to be able to sort through what has credibility, what doesn't have credibility, who is somebody, which sources which media outlets are actually doing their job, and what is just somebody mouthing off with an opinion.
Yeah. We've got a few minutes left. I want to come back to the business of news. To what part, Marty, do you think that, a tech genius, somebody with some incredible sort of bandwidth, one of the smartest people of our generation, Jeff Bezos's ownership kind of helped the Post sort of evolve to this digital-first, digital-friendly organization?
Well, Jeff's acquisition had a profound impact on the Washington Post. He had a profound impact, there's no question, because immediately after acquiring us, he changed our strategy. We were primarily regional. Yeah, we focused on the government, we focused on politics, but other than that, we focused on this region around Washington. And he said we needed to change the strategy, that we needed to become national and even international, and that we had an ideal opportunity to do that for several reasons. One, we were in the nation's capital. Two, we had the name the Washington Post, which could be leveraged to a national and international level. And three, we had this history, this tradition of shining a light in dark corners that defined our identity, going back to Watergate. And that was our brand. And we had an identity. And now we had the opportunity in the digital era to distribute nationally and internationally at virtually no additional cost. And he said, you've taken all the pain of the internet. You've suffered all the financial losses. It's destroyed every pillar of your industry. But you haven't taken the gift that the internet has to offer you. And that is worldwide distribution at virtually no additional cost. And you're positioned to take that gift, and you should take it. And so we should start and move quickly to take advantage of this, because the Washington Post, almost uniquely in American media, was in a position to seize on that opportunity.
Yeah, no, but most business people, and I think you obviously got very lucky with a man like Jeff Bezos, who has a very strong backbone. He was able to support and encourage you, sort of, doing tough stories that any promoter proprietor would kind of, that just would be tough and intimidating. But he had that backbone. And so this idea of independent journalism being funded by, benevolent billionaires like Jeff Bezos, it worked obviously at the Post. Do you think it's a model that can be replicated in other parts of the world?
Well, I think it has limited applicability to the rest of the world. I mean, there are only so many people who are wealthy as he is who even want to own a media outlet, have any interest in owning it, and also who are willing to grant their newsrooms the kind of independence and integrity that they require in order to be credible sources of information. Jeff really has stood up against a lot of pressure. He has been a person of total integrity with respect to our newsroom, and I'm grateful for that. That can't be the model for all media around the world, or even all media within the United States. There just aren't enough people like that. We were lucky. There's no question about it. I was asked the other day whether I believe in luck, and I said yes, I did. And I was asked whether I felt I was lucky, and I said yes, I am. And we've been lucky that way. But I do think that there are some other lessons that need to be drawn from this, and that is that, first of all, to come up with a clear strategy that is an idea that's workable. I mean, for us, that made all the difference in the world. The other is that there does need to be an investment that allows us to make that transition from a print era to a digital era. We're way overdue for that, by the way. We live in a digital world today. And somehow that investment needs to be made to sort of build that bridge to digital without destroying the product as it exists, without undercutting all of the resources that are available to just do coverage, reporters. Because ultimately people are going to pay for the reporting. They're going to pay for original reporting, high quality reporting. That is what attracts subscriptions. And so you can't deprive the newsroom of the resources to do that kind of original reporting. So somehow you have to build a bridge to the future. And that's what Jeff was able to do for us. We're not treated as a charity. We're not we are a self-sustaining business. He has insisted all along that we maintain the discipline of an actual business, that we earn our way. Now we are able to take our earnings and reinvest them in our growth. He doesn't need the dividends, from what I can tell. Yeah. And so he allows us to reinvest. And I think that that's important, is to recognize the value of investment. The investment has to be in the right things, and we need to provide high quality coverage, but deliver the news and information in a way that suits people's lifestyles today, which is digital.
Absolutely, Marty. I got a couple of minutes more with you, so I'm just going to ask you for a quick one. What was the toughest phone call that you have gotten in your career so far?
I don't know about phone call, but I mean, but certainly one of the big issues was obviously when we received the Snowden documents, those were the most highly classified documents in the U.S. government. We had made a decision to publish. Clearly, the government didn't want us to. We had meetings with with people in the intelligence community. They were very upset with us. Those are tough decisions. So we went ahead. We recognized there was a public policy issue. There's certain particulars that we left out of these stories because of concerns within the intelligence community. And I think we handled it responsibly. And I've had people who were involved in that tell me that they thought that while they would have preferred that we not publish anything, they felt that in that we decided to go ahead and publish, they felt that we handled it responsibly.
And Marty, if there's any one thing, I'm just going to take a quote here. It's been said that an institution is the lengthened shadow of one man. You yourself are an institution. As you leave the post, what kind of a Marty shadow does the newsroom have?
It's a hard one for me to answer, but look, I hope I hope people remain dedicated to our core mission. And that is stated in the very first principle on the wall when you walk into our newsroom. And it is to tell the truth as nearly as the truth may be ascertained. That recognizes that getting at the truth is hard. It requires hard work. It's a process. The truth can be elusive, but it also recognizes that there is such a thing as the truth. There are such things as facts. It's not just a matter of opinion. It's not just a matter of who holds power. It's not just a matter of who has the biggest megaphone. There is actually something called objective fact and objective reality. And our job is to get at that. Our job is to publish that as best we can, and not to be deterred, not to be pressured, not to be distracted, and to continue to do that regardless of the attacks and pressure that we come under. And I hope that is the first principle of the Washington Post. And I hope my shadow is reflective of that first principle.
I'm sure it will be. Marty, again, I admire you so much. Even before, the first time we met, you would remember, but, it was just, I just really admire the work you've done, and really, all the best. And I thank you, really, just thank you for what you've done to journalism. It's really, you've just shown that you've just given all of us so much hope that, that what we believed in, what we stand for, what we fight for can make sense, can make business sense, can grow, can evolve, can actually thrive, and kind of not sort of, we don't have to be dinosaurs to kind of do what we're doing. So really, we all have you to thank for that.
Thank you, Anand. And I hope to see you in India.
Marty, please do come.
Okay.
And you must come and do an adda with us when you
okay, great. Thanks a lot.
All the best. Thanks.
Bye.